They said, quote, a possible malfunction of the gun significantly affects causation with regard to Baldwin. If it is determined that the gun did not malfunction, charges against Mr. Baldwin will proceed. The prosecution anticipates making a final charging decision with regard to Mr. Baldwin within the next 60 days. Well, it appears that the new report shows the gun may not have malfunctioned and that it was not modified. This is from the new ballistics report, quote, from an examination of the fired cartridge case and the operationally restored evidence revolver, this fatal incident was the consequence of the hammer being manually retracted to its fully rearward and cocked position, followed at some point by the pull or rearward depression of the trigger. And although Alec Baldwin repeatedly denies pulling the trigger, given the test findings and observations reported here, the trigger had to be pulled or depressed sufficiently to release the fully cocked or retracted hammer of the evidence revolver. Now, that is in line with an earlier FBI analysis which found that the gun could not be made to fire without a pull of the trigger. So now there are two forensic reports essentially saying they must have pulled the trigger. In a statement, Special Prosecutor Kerry Morrissey seems furious at the reason this got released. It's because the armorer, Hannah Reid's defense team, put it in their court filing, and they're calling it a leaking of this. Remember, charges were not dropped against her. So they're still going back and forth on legal filings. The Special Prosecutor Morrissey saying, quote, charges are still being considered against Mr. Baldwin, but a final decision has not yet been made. We're proceeding carefully and thoughtfully. And the motion is nothing but a press grab. Jury instructions are ruled upon by the court at the close of evidence during a trial, and he simply used this motion as a means to disseminate the ballistics report. He's not denying that this was the report. Remember, Baldwin initially got the book thrown at him by a, I think, overzealous DA who overcharged and sort of bungled the case. So I wonder how this is going to change anything. Is it going to change everything? Joining me now is John Day, New Mexico criminal defense attorney who knows several of the key players involved. He also served as a special prosecutor in that state. Thanks very much for coming on the program. Appreciate it. So how worried should Alec Baldwin be right now?
I think very worried. I think the fact that the special prosecutor said in June, if it turns out the gun didn't malfunction, we're going to proceed. And I think this the third forensic report clearly says, basically, by not saying anything at all, that there was no malfunction of the gun. There was nothing wrong with it. So I would expect that they are going to refile against Alec Baldwin on the basis of this third forensic report.
And do you think they would be the same kinds of charges that he was facing before?
I would think so. I would think it's basically the negligent homicide, the fourth degree felony, the lowest level felony that they have, the involuntary manslaughter charge that was initially filed and then dropped.
Now, what do we know, or what do you know about these special prosecutors? I mean, it seems that they were pretty careful here at the outset, much less aggressive than the initial prosecutors had been. Should that be any comfort for Alec Baldwin?
I think just the opposite. You have the initial prosecution was riddled with missteps, with bad judgment calls and political calls that did not help any. And this new group of special prosecutors, Kerry Morrissey is actually a very polished, experienced criminal defense lawyer. And I think what you've seen is a massive shift in strategy and themes. They're not using the high-paid media consultants to make public statements, which actually had a lot of lawyers cringing because those statements were probably over the line on what prosecutors could say, and it didn't help the case. Much more polished, much more reserved, and I think in a very professional approach to it. But I wouldn't be surprised to see charges refiled pretty quickly.
I was going to ask you about the timing. What do you think on the timing?
Well, I mean, they've got to move forward. They've got the Hannah Reid case coming up, and of course, Reid's attorneys are going to be grasping at this to say we can now spread the blame around. It's Baldwin's fault. There's this intervening cause which caused the death. I mean, they're trying to use the civil jury instructions basically in the criminal case. But I would expect that Kerry Morrissey, now that she has this report in hand, is going to have to move, or is going to move relatively swiftly.
Thank you for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your cable provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.